Just south of the vibrant, crowded streets of Mexico City lies a sprawling network of ancient Aztec canals. By day, Xochimilco is a sanctuary of color and music. But when the sun sets, the tourist boats vanish and the labyrinth of artificial islands, the Chinampas, plunges into absolute, isolating darkness. It is a place where the water is opaque, where secrets sink into the mud and are rarely spoken of again. But in the 1950s, one man found something in the water that refused to stay buried. Don Julián Santana Barrera was a hermit. He had left his wife and family to live a life of total isolation on a small, overgrown island deep in the canals. He sought peace. Instead, he found a nightmare. The exact date is lost to history, but the event shattered Julián's mind permanently. While walking the perimeter of his island, he saw a shape floating in the dark water lilies. It was a young girl. She had drowned, her body tangled in the roots beneath the surface. Julián pulled her to the muddy bank, but it was too late. He was entirely alone with her corpse, miles from any help, listening to the silence of the swamp. The authorities eventually took the girl's body, but Julián claimed her spirit never left the island. Days later, in the exact same spot where the girl had perished, Julián found something else floating in the water. A single, pristine doll. In a desperate attempt to appease the restless spirit, to quiet the invisible screams he claimed were echoing through the trees at night, Julián took the doll and hung it from a branch, a peace offering to a phantom. But one doll was not enough. The voices in the dark demanded more, and so the obsession began. To understand the island of the dolls, you must understand the nature of a diseased mind. One doll was meant to be a final tribute, a way to lay the drowned girl to rest. But trauma does not negotiate. To Julián, the whispers in the dark did not stop, they amplified. He convinced himself that the spirit was still trapped in the murky waters of Xochimilco, pulling at the roots, demanding companions. So, Julián stopped farming. He stopped tending to his crops. His entire existence shifted to a single, macabre purpose: the harvest. He began to scavenge. He paddled his small wooden chalupa through the canals at dawn, searching the floating trash and the muddy banks. Whenever he found a discarded doll, a severed plastic head, a torso missing its limbs, a face melted by the Mexican sun, he brought it back. He believed these broken effigies absorbed the evil spirits that haunted the Chinampas. He nailed them to the weeping willow trees. He strung them from the branches with rusted wire. He impaled them on wooden stakes along the water's edge, creating a perimeter of lifeless, watching eyes. Decades passed. The elements took their toll. The relentless sun blistered their plastic skin. The heavy summer rains washed away their painted faces. Spiders nested in their hollow, open mouths. What started as a shrine had mutated into a grotesque purgatory. Thousands of dolls now hung from every branch, swaying silently in the wind. Julián was no longer just a hermit. He had become the prophet of decay, sharing his isolated world with an army of silent witnesses. But as the island grew more crowded, Julián's grip on reality finally snapped. There is a specific evolutionary reason why the island of the dolls feels so profoundly wrong to the human mind. Psychologists call it the Uncanny Valley. When we see an object that looks almost human but lacks the spark of life, our brains do not process it as a toy. Deep within our primal neurology, our subconscious registers it as a corpse, or worse, a diseased entity. It triggers an immediate visceral flight response, automatophobia, the terror of the false human. Now, imagine suppressing that instinct. Imagine living in a space where thousands of these false humans are suspended in the periphery of your vision. At night, the shadows stretch. The flickering light of a single lantern catches the glass eyes of a porcelain head. The wind moves the branches, and out of the corner of your eye, the bodies seem to turn and watch you. For anyone else, it would induce an immediate psychotic break, but for Julián, it was comfort. As the years bled into decades, Julián's isolation became absolute. He stopped speaking to the few locals who dared to navigate near his chinampa. When his nephew occasionally visited to bring him basic supplies, Julián confessed a terrifying new reality. He claimed the dolls were no longer just wards to keep the drowned girl away. He claimed they had become vessels. He said that when the sun went down and the mist rolled over the black water, the dolls would wake up. He heard them whispering in the branches. He heard them moving. And worst of all, he started listening to what they were saying.
For 50 years, Don Julián Santana Barrera lived in a self-imposed purgatory. By the early 2000s, he was an old man. His body was failing, but his mind was entirely consumed by the island. The dolls now numbered in the thousands. They covered every inch of his property, a silent, decaying legion that had grown into the bark of the trees and sunk into the mud. But the ritual of collecting was no longer enough. The entities he believed he was keeping at bay were growing restless. In early 2001, Don Julián's nephew, Anastasio, came to the island to help him clear some weeds. As they worked near the edge of the water, Julián stopped. He stared into the dark, opaque depths of the canal. He turned to his nephew and confessed something that would seal the island's dark mythology forever. He said the sirens in the water were calling to him. He said the spirit of the drowned girl, the one he had spent half a century trying to appease, had finally demanded a permanent companion. She wanted him to join her in the depths. Anastasio dismissed the rambling of an old, exhausted man. He left the island for a few hours to run errands in town. When he returned, the island was dead silent. The wind had stopped. The thousands of dolls hung motionless in the heavy air. Anastasio called out for his uncle, walking the perimeter of the chinampa. He found him at the edge of the water. Don Julián was dead. He had drowned. But it was the location of his body that cemented the terror of Xochimilco. He was found floating face down in the canal, in the exact same spot where he had found the drowned girl 50 years before. The cycle was complete. The Watcher had finally been claimed by the water.
Don Julián is gone, but the island did not die with him. following his mysterious drowning, his nephew Anastasio inherited the Chinampa. He chose not to burn it down. He chose not to cut the thousands of decaying dolls from the weeping willows. Instead, he left them exactly as his uncle had arranged them. Today, La Isla de las Muñecas is a macabre tourist attraction. By day, flat-bottomed boats bring curious visitors from all over the world. They bring their own dolls to add to the collection, a morbid toll paid to the spirit of the drowned girl. But the local trajeneros, the men who navigate these canals for a living, tell a different story. They will take you to the island when the sun is shining, but they refuse to linger when dusk approaches. They claim that when the heavy mist rolls back over the black water, the island wakes up. They swear they can hear the dolls whispering to each other in the branches. They say the severed plastic heads slowly rotate to follow the boats as they pass. They say the entities Don Julián was trying to appease are no longer just trapped in the water. They are trapped in the plastic. So ask yourself, when we attribute human traits to lifeless objects, are we just projecting our own fears? Or are we giving them exactly what they need to watch us back? Welcome to Arcanum. If you survived this journey into the shadows, subscribe and leave a mark in the comments below. What mystery should we unearth next?